So folks, thank you. Of course, Pepsi gang, thanks for coming and cheering us. Hopefully some new thoughts as well. And thanks to everyone else. So I'm Sagar. I lead the CPG business. Amlan, maybe a quick intro of yourself.
Yeah, Amlan Maitra, part of PepsiCo and part of the data analytics and AI organization. I lead the enterprise data team with specific focus on data engineering, data management, our data, BI, AI platforms. Been with the company 20 years.
Yep.
And in the data analytics AI space for, I would say, about the last 10 years or so.
Amazing. Thanks, Amlan. So this is a topic which, we were working at another large CPG and then I think Amlan visited a Gartner conference and then I connected Amlan and the other CPG exec and that's how this whole conversation started. So I think, this is familiar with any most CPG or retailer across the industry that, every CEO and every board wants to be, AI ahead, any term you want, many buzzwords there, right? But they want agentic at scale and change the way the company works, right? And then we see many agentic pilots, right? It works at small scale, but the wide scale adoption is still a big challenge, right? And then when it comes to data leaders and we partner a lot of data leaders, right? So we know what the challenges are. So maybe no one better than you, Amlan, to talk about what you see as data challenges at a high level, and then maybe we peel the onion from there.
Yeah, so I think you've been one of our trusted partners in the journey that we have been on, along with Databricks, in building out what we call the Enterprise Data Foundation. So it's been a multi-year journey that we are on, bringing at this point in time, and this is where some of the challenges are going to come out, mostly structured data. And for an organization of PepsiCo's size, 90 billion plus in revenue, 200 plus countries that we operate in, various disparate systems, no easy task just to even bring the structured data, internal and external, into what we call the Enterprise Data Foundation. Just for reference, right, we're talking about our data estate being today about 50 to 60 petabytes. And the data foundation itself is probably, call it 15, 20 petabytes. So even post-consolidation, we're talking about a very, very large data foundation. Again, the focus has been mostly on structured data. There's a lot that has been done, a lot to be done. But there's been heavy emphasis, not only obviously from an instrumentation standpoint in terms of making sure that the pipelines have observability built in and audit and so on and so forth, but a lot of heavy emphasis on governance, which has been something that has been missing in the past. So we have a dedicated data governance team with data stewards, heavy focus on quality, heavy focus on cataloging, and so on. But that's just, again, on the structured side. So now if you think about getting data ready and the data foundation ready for the world of Gen AI and the agentic AI, we were talking about, firstly, a bridge to unstructured data, right? So there's a vast white space that we need to still traverse. But then, equally importantly, you get into, how good is your metadata, right? You're talking about not human beings interpreting. You're talking about machines, autonomous agents needing to interpret the data.
Yep.
So, I think that, in a nutshell, are, I think, a couple of the big sort of challenges I see in terms of bridging from where we are to where we need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. We pulled up a table, consolidating a lot of our grief, and maybe a lot of you can relate to this. So this is some of the common challenges when we think of non-human interacting with tables, right? So one of the examples which you've run into is the hierarchies, right? Quite often when human beings see a table, they're sort of able to figure out what is the hierarchy and then quickly make some changes to the table and then use it. But do you expect an agent to look at, say, the region column there and figure out that, hey, not all of them are the same level of granularity and I have to change it? That's one common example. The other one, hilarious one, of the last two, which is, you have developers, ETL developers, calling tables, and this is real. It still happens today, where they say sales underscore dummy or sales underscore final underscore one, all of that, right? So how is an agent going to be able to figure out what's the right table which they should be picking up, or right column, right? So, and many such challenges, and this is real, right? And this is what we face across our customer base. So I think the point there is, taking a step back, what does it really take for agentic to be real, and what should the data foundation change to so that this becomes real? So some inspiration, I think today in the keynote, Jamie Dimon spoke about steam engine as the original general purpose technology. I didn't know he'd say that, so I picked cars, right? It took 20 years for us to go from the first sort of car prototype to Model T as a general purpose technology which everybody can use, right? And so the question then is, how long does it take? I mean, obviously it may not take 20 years. The reason is, why does it take a long time? Because too many things have to fall in place, right? I mean, they have to figure out mass production, and they have to figure out reliability, all of that. The question is, when you're thinking of an agentic journey, when does that inflection point, or what is commonly used in the general purpose technology term as a J curve, what's the tipping point? When does that happen is the real question. And I think everyone's talking LLMs and the likes, and every corner of San Francisco possibly there is a startup which is Agentic. We've possibly heard that in all the pitches here, but we're not going to that, right? We're more grounded. We have to sell chips and beverages. So I think the question is, what is then really needed for that inflection point to happen, right? And one of our observations is that you need a lot of vertical focused models and what we call as context. Maybe at this point, maybe I'll pull you up, and then I'll possibly talk about this. But maybe what is your interpretation of context, Amlan, in the way you've seen?
Yeah. So I mean, before I get to context, based on what you just put up, which I thought it was very interesting in the GPT point that you're making, right? So this afternoon I was part of a session where one of the founders of Databricks was talking about this, and I thought was a very apt and interesting graph that he put up, right? So there are a couple of vectors which I think are also important for us to consider as we think about the maturity of the agentic journey. So one is sort of the relative complexity in terms of exposure to the business and or let's say the end consumer. So if something is relatively more in the realm of, is it going to give you some suggestion, it helps you bridge a task 50, 60% of the way, it's an efficiency use case, you have an agent supporting you, that's one thing. Now you have something where it's really going to have a business decision that it's making and or, it's got absolute impact on customer service. The two paradigms are very different. So in terms of how right do you need the agent to be? So as you move towards the more autonomous spectrum, right, this becomes more important in terms of how accurate the agent needs to be. The other is scale, right? I mean, if you have a small subset of data, so then to be able to drive the right context and or the metadata is a smaller problem. Then now if we are talking about an estate of a corporation like PepsiCo and similar companies, right? So that's, I think, what I feel as well is very important in this conversation. But so now coming to your point about the context, so this is where, and you pulled up a good example, I thought, so I think I saw you pulling up lead time, right? So coming from the world of supply chain, right, there are so many different lead times, so many definitions of lead time. So, I was thinking about 10 years or so back, I was tasked with leading an effort to create sort of PepsiCo's, global metric solution. So when we brought together all of the global operations into a centralized organization. One of the first charter for the organization was, hey, let's rack and stack all the plants and the warehouses on common metrics. And it was an ordeal to really get to a common definition of things like true efficiency, or even simple things like lead time or cycle time and so on. So now imagine if that's the state of affairs, even if you have the right cataloging in place. A human being can pull up a catalog and be able to say, you know, if I am being asked to create a calculation that uses the lead time, I need to add this warehouse lead time with the manufacturing lead time, with that lead time, this lead time. Imagine an agent if you don't have that exact same semantic understanding of each one of those lead times, and you're going to get a wrong answer.
Yep, well, that's exactly what we've captured here. And what you saw in the previous screen was actually a real catalog where, and this is for real. I mean, this is not Pepsi, of course, but this is, you know, a different customer implementation. Just look at, I mean, as a developer, if I'm doing it, forget agents, even as a human being, I'm the ETL developer, and just look at 97455 results, and I had to figure this out. And this is a humongous challenge for, you know, any, you know, living being, forget alone agent, right? And, you know, what you just said, you know, just put a simple infographic here. That is, imagine there's an agent which is actually, you know, asking a question, you know, which is what is the lead time to deliver a particular product, and, you know, instead of using the right metrics, it say missed one of the lead time components, say a warehousing lead time, and as a consequence, you have an impact that the customer is running out of stock, right? Because it estimated instead of you know, 5 days, it sent it in 8 days, and therefore the goods didn't arrive on time, and there is a real business loss. So that I think that's a very powerful example, and unfortunately this is real, right? Where you know, due to, and of course it was not an agent, but it is just a human interacting, right? But it caused real business loss. So metadata, or the lack of it, right? Lack of context in the way you deal with data can create real loss, right? So then we come to the question of what is context, right? Do you want to opine on this?
No, I think so. You know, this infographic you have put up there is quite important, right? I think it goes through all of these aspects to really drive context.
Right.
And again, I think this is where sort of the point that I was making earlier becomes important, is if this context is not, say, good enough, and if the agent comes back with a response that is not accurate enough, then ultimately there is a hill to climb to get to that point of accuracy. So in order to get to that point of accuracy which is acceptable, then you have to drive a lot of feedback loop, and so on and so forth, right? Ultimately, somehow, somewhere, you'll have to get to this point of the holistic context for the agent to be really, really useful. So either we provide all of this information that constitutes what is known as context upfront, right, through capabilities, obviously, you know, through high levels of investment in metadata and so on and so forth, or you can have the painful task of needing to provide this feedback with a human in the loop, which is going to become a major problem, particularly when you're talking about scale use cases.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, if you read most of the latest thoughts on you know, generative AI applications and how they're pushing to achieve accuracy, you will see a common reference to a term called scaffolding, which is basically that you have to add more and more components. Like, I mean, there's a LoRa model you'll have to add. You'll have different types of, you know, BEF models or a fine tuning or post inference, like just to make the, I mean, because of the absence of context, you have to add so many more engineering components, and that is very unwieldy. It's like, you know, you just want to go from point A to point B, and you know, it makes the engineering effort involved in making that is unwieldy, and that does not scale, right? And that's the big realization we've had in a lot of our agentic implementations, and that's where we are starting to engage our customers to say, hey, I think instead of, you know, racing head first and getting this done, right, and then failing when scaling, let's invest time in building context, right? And and this is typically what we've seen is stewardship and governance organizations taking a lead in this because they're close to the source, they're aware of it, and that's a tough challenge too. I mean, getting the right kind of stewards is always a challenge, but I think these are some of the things we've seen, which is, of course, basics is definition, right? What does the metric mean? And then, where would you apply this particular KPI? And I think it's a small statement, but in the complexity and scale of large organizations, like you have multiple acquisitions, you have multiple, for example, lead time definitions. So where should I use a warehousing lead time plus a manufacturing lead time plus a store lead time vis-a-vis only one of them? And then the other is, of course, I think a lot of these KPIs and dashboards and metrics exist in connection with each other, right? So if the common, like I've been in about 8 or 9 customer meetings the last 2 days, most common refrain, hey, my executives, we've been doing the data foundation, but I have 3 dashboards, 3 different KPI, definitions, and then there is a lot of effort spent on reconciling, and that's hampering decision making. Right? And that's a common refrain. Usually that points to a lack of a solid data model, but even if you've built the data model, but you don't have the context and the relatability of KPIs, then that's usually a challenge, right? And many, I think, we put a sample of about 5 dimensions of context, but many more there. And I think the point is that even within KPIs, I think we're starting to see that the network relationship between KPIs exists. The reason I say that is that what we've seen when we're trying to implement this for our customers is you implement a knowledge graph, right? And I think that's the main point we're trying to drive here, and in customer implementations, that we build the data foundation, but if you don't build a knowledge graph, which is sort of the guardrail, which tells you how an agent should read a metric or even human being, then even the semantic implementations, which have been quite popular these days, that starts to fail. Right? So I don't know if you have any reflections on
No,
that.
and I think, in all of sort of our engagements, this is coming to the fore as well, that you can have a very, very strong core data foundation, but then increasingly you need to have what we're calling essentially a knowledge layer. And that knowledge layer is, and you'll find a lot of the industry talk about a knowledge graph-based semantic layer, right? Which is sort of what you're getting at, which is there is interrelationships that are equally important for the context,
right,
as you were describing earlier. So if you don't have the full set of relationships defined, then you are not essentially going to have the context that is required for an agent to be autonomous, right? For a human being, implicitly we are figuring out these relationships, right? So now you got to make sure that the agent is empowered to be able to do something similar.
Yeah, we may not, every company may not be lucky enough to have someone like, say, John, who spent 27 years in a company, who can tell you the different relationships between KPI. 27, did I get that right? 32, man. That's context.
Eric's 29.
Eric's 29? Wow. That's context in life and flesh, but I think we have to take that into a knowledge graph. I think that's where it is. And here's a simplified example. Imagine that we actually had a knowledge graph, right? And the same question which we asked in the past, right? So the agent would first go query the knowledge graph, get the context, and that's where the right filters and the relationships and the right hierarchies to be used and all of that, right? All of that, for example, which exists in this brain trust, we are able to codify that, right? And then, the agent is able to do a much better job of running what-if simulations and arriving at the right, metric. And I think to your point, accuracy is going to be the bedrock of everything we do in Agentic. Otherwise, this will become a huge hype cycle and have a big crash and doom, right? So that's that. And I think, this is another, we're starting to represent what does the knowledge graph really look like. I think we just spoke about, coding that knowledge. And the way we think about it is a 5-layered stack, right, of how this all pans out. Of course, we have the data foundation, which say in our case, we've been building at the bottom. Then on top of it, you layer out a knowledge graph, then the semantic model sort of becomes the physical manifestation of that knowledge graph where your agents or the RAGs or the BI tools hit. And this is something we've seen actually start to work, right, in some of our large customers who are progressive. So I think you guys have been on this journey. You've been thinking about it. Any reflections on that?
Yeah, I think, so this makes a whole lot of sense. Again, I'm sure for the PepsiCo team, we've looked at somewhat similar sorts of architectural patterns. I think the one point of reflection for some of us as we have, been discussing the knowledge graph, and we've had some interactions even with some of the providers of, let's say, knowledge graph. And if you look at our estate, so the example that you gave, right, with the relationships and so on, with the lead time, how do you scale a capability like the knowledge graph? I mean, what endeavor does it take? That's the point of reflection, which is, something that we would love for our partners to help us with. I mean, we're accountable in my remit and most of the team's remit. We're a centralized organization.
Yep.
We have a global remit across every functional area, every BU in the world, right? Who needs a knowledge graph? What amount of data needs to be brought into the knowledge graph? What effort does it take to build something like that? So those are questions.
Yeah.
Can it be automatic through AI building the knowledge graph for you, right, if you are being able to prompt it, right? So I mean, those are some of the, I guess, questions at the top of our mind.
Yeah. So with that, we'll move into some more challenging questions because we are engaging in a lot of our customers, and these are some of the topics, questions which come our way. So if you want, you can throw this back to me, but I'll have you try it. So common question is, hey Sagar, look, we've invested. I think yesterday there is a customer. It's a $80 billion company which supplies ingredients. They might be supplying to you as well. So they said we are equal opportunity employer to all tools, right? So they have so many tools in their landscape. They gave every tool an opportunity to give a bet, right? So there is fatigue when you start a conversation that, hey, you need to build a knowledge graph. You need to build a semantic layer. Like, dude, I've been spending money on Colibra, on Atlassian, and whatever are the likes. So do I really have to buy more tools, or how is this whole context building? Do you have a take on that?
So it's an and answer, right? As I said. So the catalog is absolutely critical. You need to know from a technical metadata standpoint and a business metadata standpoint, what do you have? And you have to do that accurately. So that's a starting point. But the point that I think we have tried to make over the last few minutes is that that's not going to be sufficient.
Yep.
If you want to go towards the world of autonomous agents. So yeah. I think that's really my succinct response to your question.
Yeah. So I think our response is similar, that I think existing data cataloging tools, of course, you need to have a good catalog where especially the business glossary is well populated, which itself is a lack in as you scan the enterprise landscape. But a knowledge graph is something you may have to sort of implement. You don't need to buy it off the shelf as something we recommend. The other question, I think you just touched upon this maybe, this is how can you build context at the scale at which you are? Is this another 5-year exercise?
Yeah.
So here actually what we've seen is, we've been able to accelerate a wee bit using LLM, right? As the case may be. It does provide some acceleration, because if you give, so what we've built is so I lead CPG, so we built a vertical focused small language model with a lot of hypotheses, questions, and we call it Milky Way. It will be out, I think it's out on LinkedIn at least, and then we'll bring it to all you folks. But because of that, we are able to train the language model not on world knowledge, but on business context to be able to land some of this context. Yet, I can't claim success on this yet, but this is something we are experimenting. So that's some work in progress. Other big question is, I mean, this is a little philosophical, I'd say, but it's interesting, which is, let's say you cross the chasm of providing context, right? Are agents in the future truly going to be asking a better questions, or are they really in the drive to give a better answer? What do you think?
I don't know. I've not thought about it. It's an interesting question. If the goal of the agent is to provide a response to a very specific question, then yes, it should be providing the right answer or a better answer. And then perhaps as it gets smarter over time, then it should start asking more questions. That have you thought about XYZ?
Yeah.
Right. So it's probably the answer would be both.
Yeah, so what we are seeing is, initially because of the way, conversational bots started, it all started with better answers. But now I think, some customers are starting to say, hey, I don't really need an agent for me to go and ask the agent. Can the agent proactively say every Monday morning, right? Especially as we're building executive dashboards. I mean, the CEOs are usually demanding, saying, hey, I'm giving you so much money to do agent and Gen AI. So do you really need me to go and further ask what's going to happen? Why can't the agent talk to me and tell me, hey, I looked at your sales in Walmart, it's going up or down, here's what you should do, right? So I think there's going to be a point in time where with better context, there's going to be more demand, because we're going to make business case around context. So the pushback is going to come saying, okay, what do I get in return for providing you the money, right? Perhaps last question. Should every or can every enterprise build a knowledge graph?
So I think the should is a yes, right? Can every enterprise build a knowledge graph? I think the answer would be in what it entails, right? If it is something, as you were explaining, if the barrier to getting to a knowledge graph for, a corpus of data is reduced, then I think the answer would be yes. I'm assuming that's sort of the general line of the question, right?
No, but what we've seen is that, there are, every organization is at a different scale of maturity and journey. We work with CPGs across the scale. So in the case of a $15, $20 billion sort of CPG, right? The whole KPI list to run their business pretty much is about 200, 250 odd KPIs, right? And there are actually a few enough Johns and Erics there who have the context. And so at that point, we're like, hey, if you have to start this whole journey on a knowledge graph, the ROI starts to get questioned, right? Hey, you know what? Let's create the data foundation, get the basics right. Let's stop running an organization on narratives. I think based on the stage of maturity of customers, we've seen that it's not a be all end all answer. Sometimes I think we have to be tactical about it as well. So
makes sense. Yeah, I think there probably is going to be some kind of a ROI tipping point.
Right. Because it does take money to build context, to put the knowledge graph now. So that's what we had, folks. Thanks, Amlan. Any other closing thoughts?
No, I think, again, this conference, obviously, as I've attended over the last 6 months, some of us were just talking about it before this session, and some of the announcements here, right? Agent breaks, a lot of focus on Agentic. I was at the Microsoft Ignite conference in November, a lot of focus on Agentic. At Gartner, the same thing, right? So I think that bridge to that world of Agentic, we're still trying to figure out, right? What does it unlock? Right. So if context, knowledge graph, if that's sort of the key unlock, then that's something we probably need to double down on.
Yeah, exciting times that we can actually postulate, hopefully not go wrong with it. Yeah. Cool. Thank you guys. Thanks for your time.